Barbara Ann Brennan. Barbara Ann Brennan es sanadora, terapeuta y científica. Ha dedicado más de 20 años al estudio y exploración del campo de la energía humana. Nacimiento, el 17 de enero de 1933, Saratoga Springs, Nueva York, Estados Unidos. Fecha de la muerte, 7 de noviembre de 2019. Educación, Universidad de Wisconsin-Madison, 1962. Barbara Ann Brennan se doctoró en física atmosférica y trabajó como investigadora en la NASA. Durante los últimos 15 años se ha dedicado a estudiar el campo de la energía humana y a practicar la terapia bioenergética. Es autora de 3 libros, Manos que curan, Hágase la luz y Sanación esencial, que se han convertido en pilares tanto de la nueva medicina como de la literatura New Age. Gracias a sus observaciones, que coinciden con las de otras personas capaces de ver el aura, ha descubierto que las ideas y las emociones asociadas a dichas ideas presentan determinadas configuraciones específicas en el campo energético del ser humano. Según explica, los problemas psicológicos y emocionales se manifiestan en el CEH.
And feel something between your hands. And when I do this with large groups of people, I simply ask them what they feel. And there's always the same kind of responses.
I feel a tingling.
Great. Anything else?
I feel a little bit, I'm a little bit aware because I have done an exercise like this before. I feel a little bit of weight the closer my hands get together and less weight as they come apart.
Now try it a little further apart. See what happens. Can you still feel it?
I'm not the expert that you are, so I can't feel it as intensely the further apart that they get. But
right, that's normal.
I have a vague sense of it. Part of it, I think, is trusting that what I'm feeling is really there.
That's right. That's always important because you need a sounding board of experience. And the more you try this, the more you're going to trust what you're feeling. It's kind of getting used to it.
What are you feeling?
I'm feeling tingling, pressure. I'm also seeing the field between my hands. I'm seeing it build up. So the more I do this, actually, the more pressure I feel when I go in. Notice when you have your hands out here and push them in.
Yes.
You feel it more?
Yes.
It's like an energy ball that grows in the hand.
And I did this exercise with someone once, and he was doing this, and I put my hand through, and I felt something.
Great.
That was exciting.
Another one is to just draw circles on the palm of your hand without touching it. What do you feel?
I feel, again, kind of a light tingling. It's very light.
And where do you feel the tingling? Is it in a shape?
Yeah, it's in the shape of the circle that I'm making.
Great. And the other hand? This is a good one for people to try.
Why so?
Well, because it's the shape. When you draw the shape and feel it, this one you can say, oh, no, I don't really feel anything. But as soon as you're doing this, there's a very specific shape that you feel on your hand that correlates to what your finger movement is.
And it doesn't matter if your eyes are open or closed?
No, you can try it either way because you might be able to feel it easier if your eyes are closed because there's less distraction.
Do you feel the same thing, that tingling?
Yeah. Pressure, tingling. Mostly tingling.
And it takes time to develop this. I mean, if you're brand new at this, you might not feel something right away.
Right.
It requires some practice.
Right. It's a simple thing to practice. You can practice it any time. Then the best one, at least one of my favorites, is and this is a sight exercise, seeing the auric field, is in a darkened room. It's semi-dark. You need to have some lights on. And be sure you don't look into a light and have a dark background behind your hands. Simply point your fingertips to each other and very gently gaze between your fingertips, but don't focus your eyes. Just allow your eyes to open and something to come in, and simply gaze in a dark light. And then when I do this with audiences, I just ask, what do you see again?
Now again, we would be doing this with a plain background.
Right.
And I'm looking at your slacks and the chair and the carpet, so it's a little bit different.
It's much harder.
But people start to see colors?
Colors. The first thing people usually do is start naming colors. And then they name a lot of different colors. And then I'll say, well, what is the shape of the colors? And usually they say, well, there's streamers coming from the tips of the fingers. And I'll say, where are they going? And they'll say, they're going between the fingers. Then it's, well, what happens if you move your hands to those streamers? And then people say, well, they bend too, and then they stretch if your hands go further apart.
Now, are there any people who say, I don't feel anything?
Right.
There must be. There must be some, but those are people who still can learn, in your opinion.
Absolutely. And there's two different reasons for that. One is the energy field around the hands is not strong enough. As soon as somebody gets afraid, well, I'm afraid I can't see it, immediately they pull the energy out of their hands. And then another thing is they'll be feeling it, but not believing it. Yes. There's a disconnection.
I think that's me.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, one thing I have to ask you is whether or not you are perceiving this human energy field all the time.
Mostly all the time, but there are different levels. I can on purpose focus and see very specific things, and if somebody asks me a question, I will do that. But usually I try not to snoop, as I call it, because one can get very personal information, one can see inside the body, one can see very specific things in the field, and essentially what's wrong and what's not wrong.
Let's talk a little bit about that. What information can you access from the aura? Health information?
Health information, psychological information, past history information, past history of any part of the body. There's also a kind of vision that I call internal vision, which is actually the same process as remote viewing that's been studied at Stanford Research Institute. But essentially one can look inside the body at tissues. I know that sounds really far out, but if you think about x-rays, x-rays go right through the hands. So we're not using visible light with this, obviously. We're using some other form of light.
So remote viewing, is that a scientific instrument that's measuring the field?
No. Remote viewing experiments were done with a group of people, say in the basement of a research institute, and then a group of people would go out to a site, and then the people in the basement of the research institute would draw pictures of where they were. And at first they did it with psychics, and they were pulling anybody out of the halls to do it, and everybody could do it.
Wow. So are there any scientific instruments that actually measure this field?
Not really. Not the best. Well, not completely. There are a few that have picked up some measurements, but the best research that I've seen is done by Valerie Hunt at UCLA. It's actually stored in the UCLA library called the Rolf Study. She did it quite a while ago. And she had telemetry electrodes all over the body while a healer was working on the body, and another person was reading the auric field. So the person reading the field would say, for example, I see green in the left knee, and now it's moved up to the hip. And at the same time, the electrodes in the body would read the same frequency. And she got very consistency between the frequency measured and the color the aura readers were reading. She repeated it with about 12 aura readers. So it was very good study.
In your book, Hands of Light, you make a really compelling assertion. You say that illness actually begins in the layers of the human energy field before it manifests in the physical body as a symptom or a disease process. Yeah. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that adds whole new meaning to the term preventative medicine.
It's very exciting.
What are the implications, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, very broad, very broad.
If you can catch it in advance.
That's what we're going to do. That's what people that are healers do. That's what people that can perceive the field. And it's not that hard to learn how to do it. One can begin perceiving the different levels of the auric field.
And there are 7?
There are at least 7. It actually goes out further than that. But if you study 7, it's a big study. That's a lot. The field is as complicated as the physical body is. And there are direct correlations between the patterns of the field and health and illness. So there's a health pattern that each of the levels of the field have, and if that pattern is distorted, there's a direct correlation between that distortion, say a rip or a tear in the field, or energy in the wrong place, or not charged enough, a very direct correlation between that distortion and a physical problem.
So you would see a rip or a tear or a hole in the field?
Yes.
Or you might feel that. And that tells you...
I use both, yes.
And what does that tell you? That tells you there's something going on with that particular organ.
Yes. For example, there are 7 centers in the body called chakras. They take in energy and they look like vortexes or funnels. So if, for example, in this area, in the solar plexus area, if this
campo
funnel
energético humano,
is torn
como
open,
bloques oscuros o
then there would be something
configuraciones
wrong in
auras de
this area of
diversos
the body.
tonos turbios vinculados con el tipo de emociones que se hallen en conflicto, cuyo origen radica en las ideas negativas que mantenga una persona en un momento dado. Si estas configuraciones persisten en el CEH, campo energético humano, sin resolverse, tarde o temprano ocasionan una manifestación en el cuerpo físico de la persona causando una enfermedad. De acuerdo a sus observaciones, diversas enfermedades crónicas o síntomas raros así como los problemas congénitos del cuerpo físico tienen origen en vidas anteriores. Como sus libros están orientados a la curación, dice, tan pronto como el sanador sepa que el trauma procede de una vida anterior, deba ayudar al cliente a conectar las cuestiones de su vida presente con la experiencia de las anteriores. Recomienda comenzar por tratar los problemas a nivel físico y psicodinámico, trabajo que conducirá más adelante al aspecto espiritual que, en primer lugar, ha encarnado el alma para resolver, ya que lo que se persigue no es solo curar el cuerpo físico, lo importante es curar el alma. Barbara Ann Brennan. Biografía. Barbara Ann Brennan es sanadora, terapeuta y científica. Ha dedicado más de 20 años al estudio y exploración del campo de la energía humana. Graduada en física atmosférica en la Universidad de Wisconsin, trabajó como científica investigadora en el Goddard Space Flight Center de la NASA. Estudió terapia bioenergética y energética nuclear en el Institute of Psychophysical Sciences y en la Community of the Whole Person de Washington, D.C. Su primer libro, Manos que curan, ha sido reconocido como uno de los textos fundamentales sobre curación alternativa. Es la fundadora y directora de la Barbara Brennan School of Healing de East Hampton, Long Island. Libros de Barbara Ann Brennan. Manos que curan, el libro guía de las curaciones espirituales en 1992. Hágase la luz, o también llamado Manos que curan segundo en 1994. Y sanación esencial. Su primer libro, Manos que curan, el libro guía de las curaciones espirituales, se considera un clásico en el campo de la curación espiritual, con supuestamente más de 1 millón de copias impresas en 22 idiomas. Brennan afirmó recibir información intuitiva sobre sus clientes durante las sesiones y ver patrones repetitivos en los campos de energía de sus clientes que indicaban raíces comunes subyacentes a sus dificultades. Los libros de Brennan contienen dibujos de auras y campos de energía, y descripciones de cómo los campos de energía humanos interactúan entre sí. Popularizó un modelo de 7 capas del campo de energía. Cada capa está estructurada con diferentes frecuencias y tipos de energía y realiza diferentes funciones. Brennan veía los chakras como transformadores que reciben y procesan energía universal, además de permitir la expresión y funcionamiento saludable de la propia conciencia y estructura psicofísica del individuo. Era mejor conocida por adoptar un enfoque metódico para la curación energética. Brennan creó un tipo de técnicas de curación energética que llamó curación de espectro completo para trabajar en las 7 capas del campo energético humano o auras. Brennan afirmó que la técnica que ella llamó cirugía espiritual funciona en el 5º nivel del campo de energía humano utilizando el poder de un cirujano espiritual. El concepto de Brennan de Jara. En su segundo libro, Hágase la luz, Brennan amplió su modelo de energías sutiles humanas añadiendo la dimensión de intencionalidad llamada Jara o Jara. Jara mantiene el cuerpo humano en manifestación material hasta que se cumple el propósito de la vida. Cuando el Jara está sano, el individuo actúa de forma natural y sin esfuerzo para cumplir el propósito de su vida. El Jara es la base del campo energético humano, o aura. Debido a esta relación, la curación del Ara, o también llamado Jara.
Torn open, and especially on the left side. We know we're going to have problems in organs on the left side of the body. One particular illness that shows is diabetes, shows as 2 small black vortexes. That's like a little black funnel that shouldn't be there. And with high sense perception, it makes a very high screeching sound.
So this is something you're perceiving auditorily.
Auditorily and watching, looking at it. And of course it can also be felt. Those are the 3 main senses that we use, is touch, seeing, and hearing.
So they'll feel a denseness there?
A person might feel, yes, and feel the chaos in that little dark, those 2 dark vortexes.
So this kind of work can actually be used as a diagnostic tool.
Yeah, I find it very helpful. When I had a practice in New York City for quite a while. Physicians would send their clients to me, the ones that are hard to diagnose. So it's very useful.
Can you contrast for us briefly a healthy field versus an unhealthy one?
Yes, an unhealthy field has several major factors. The field will either be torn open, and sometimes all the way out to the 7th level, like in cancer, and the field will either be stagnating energy, just like mucus in a cold. So if somebody has, for example, pelvic inflammatory disease, will have a lot of dark red energy around the pelvis, and it just sits there and stagnates. So the person would be stagnated in the physical body as well. And whenever I see that, I know that that woman's going to either a precursor to pelvic inflammatory disease or she already has it.
It's amazing that you can predict that in advance.
Yeah, and sometimes a year in advance. So far, I think that was about the furthest one that was diagnosed. The person went and got a diagnosis right away. It was diabetes in this case. He didn't show it, but a year later, his blood showed it. The other thing with illness is incoherency in the field. It will be imbalanced, like there'll be more energy on one side than the other. Certain levels will have energy, others won't. In a healthy field, there's a very balanced field. First, the field, I need to describe that the field has either structured levels or it has fluid energy that flows along those structured lines.
And one level is structured and the next is fluid.
Yes, it's every other level, yes. So when the structured levels get torn, then the fluid will pour out, in a sense. And that happens with cancer. That's why cancer people, or people that have cancer, people that have cancer will lose energy and be very tired. In addition, of course, to the physiological problems, there's also an aura leak. So healers then work to restructure the field.
Let's move into that. So if someone is ill, or it looks in his or her field like they could become ill, what could someone who's trained to do this kind of work actually do about it?
The first thing we would do is charge and balance the field, and then we would work very, very specifically to restructure the parts of the field that are not. For example, I mentioned the chakra that's torn open. We can, with our own energy, learn how to restructure that chakra, put it back in place, and essentially charge the field. Then the individual has the experience of feeling well again. And that's very important to remember wellness. And then we do that about once a week. Of course, in serious illnesses, we work with physicians.
Considera especialmente poderosa para sanar el campo áurico y, por tanto, el cuerpo físico. También habló sobre la estrella principal. Nuestra divinidad individual, una con la divinidad universal. Escuela de Curación Barbara Brennan. En 1982, cerró su práctica privada en la ciudad de Nueva York y estableció la Escuela de Curación Barbara Brennan, BBSH, diseñada para formar curanderos profesionales de todo el mundo. La escuela ha estado ubicada en Florida desde 2000 y tiene licencia de la Comisión de Educación Independiente del Estado de Florida. En 2003, Brennan abrió la Barbara Brennan School of Healing Europe, BBSHE, originalmente en Mondsee, Austria, que luego se mudó a Bad Neuenahr cerca de Bonn, Alemania en 2006 y regresó a Austria, a la pequeña ciudad de Bad Ischl en 2008. BBSH cerró en 2015. En 2007, se abrió una nueva sucursal en Tokio, Japón, que posteriormente cerró en 2010. Barbara Brennan School tiene 2.700 graduados en todo el mundo, y más de 224 profesores. La familia de Barbara Ann Brennan es amplia y nos dices estas cosas sobre ella. Su amada familia incluye 14 hijos y 19 nietos y 21 bisnietos. Barbara Ann, primo Brennan, de 86 años, residente de Nashua desde siempre, murió el jueves 7 de noviembre de 2019 en su casa rodeada de su amada familia. Nació el 17 de enero de 1933 en Nashua, hija del fallecido Edward y Agnes. Barbara también falleció antes que su esposo David Brennan. Los niños son el puente al cielo. Nuestra madre fue verdaderamente la matriarca de la familia, abrió su corazón y su hogar a todos. Ella sacrificó sus propias oportunidades personales en la vida para brindarle a su familia la posibilidad de seguir adelante y alcanzar sus sueños y metas, mientras apoyaba a cada uno de ellos sin expectativas a cambio. La devoción y dedicación de nuestra madre a la unidad de la familia fue y nunca será olvidada, ya que ella fue y es el pegamento que nos mantuvo a todos juntos. Las pasiones de nuestra madre en la vida eran la jardinería de flores, el crochet, el tejido y la música, especialmente Elvis Presley. Le gustaba ver sonreír a los demás y, sin dudarlo, hacía todo lo posible para alegrar a los demás. Su sonrisa era contagiosa para todos los que tuvieron la suerte de conocerla, pasar tiempo con ella o incluso tener un breve contacto con ella. Le encantaban las temporadas navideñas y, en Navidad, se aseguraba de que todos, incluidos nuestros vecinos y amigos cercanos, estuvieran incluidos en la alegría, brindando regalos a todos, incluso cuando su propia situación financiera era difícil. Nuestra madre fue una persona muy religiosa que nos enseñó a todos el valor del amor, el cuidado y el perdón, ya que creía profundamente en Dios. Nuestra madre disfrutó mucho sus llamadas telefónicas diarias con cada una de sus hijas, porque realmente se preocupaba por su bienestar en todos los aspectos. Algunas cosas adicionales que a nuestra madre le gustaba hacer eran ir a Rowlands con nuestro papá los viernes por la noche a cenar y ocasionalmente aparecían sus hijos o amigos y ella siempre los invitaba a todos a tomar asiento y unirse a ellos. También le encantaba alimentar a sus ardillas favoritas, ardillas listadas y a los muchos pájaros que pasaban por su jardín. Los amigos y vecinos siempre disfrutaron pasar el rato con la señora Barbara, como la llamaban muchos de los que pasaron por los años de su vida. Nuestra madre disfrutó especialmente de sus vacaciones de verano en familia, su favorita era la playa y en segundo lugar la montaña. Siempre recordaremos los viajes a la Axie Cream en Alice, Nueva York. Los numerosos viajes por carretera a la playa, a la montaña o a veces simplemente de paseo, en un auto repleto cargado con su preciosa carga, sus hijos, y ella siempre sonriendo, ya que estaba igualmente orgullosa de cada uno de nosotros y sabemos la suerte que tenemos. Mamá era una verdadera fanática de los Patriots y los Medias Rojas, veía juegos con nosotros y nos animaba. Ella era muy patriótica, creía firmemente en lo grande que es este país y respetaba a los veteranos que sirvieron. La extrañaremos con tristeza, pero su enseñanza sobre lo que significa ser una familia y su amor siempre permanecerán dentro de cada uno de nosotros, y lo mantendremos vivo para siempre a medida que se transmita de generación en generación. Aunque el viaje de nuestra madre en esta tierra está completo, ahora se unirá a los ángeles, al amor de su vida, a su esposo David Alan y al Señor. Descanse en paz nuestra maestra Barbara Ann Brennan.